to Councillor Collins for a moment. This is related, through you, Mr. Chairman, it's related to the Mobile Urban Park Initiative Study. And although it indicates that it affects wards 2, 3, and 4, it really has, I believe, a benefit for the entire city, and I'll explain why. This came to fruition at this point via the Ottawa Street BIA, and it did so keeping in mind that this is a request from the business community and not necessarily not the residents of wards 3 and 4. And in looking at the business owners on Ottawa Street, they're from everywhere, from Ancaster to Dundas to the Mountain, to the East Mountain, to the West Mountain, and even wards 1 actually. So again, this is a small business request rather than a neighborhood request. And looking at the urbanization and renaissance that the lower city has seen in the last 10 years, particularly on Locke Street, James Street, Ottawa Street, and Concession for that matter, these types of initiatives and best practices in other communities that have seen in very urbanized areas the need to provide, in many cases, means of providing shelter as well as seating capacity, particularly surrounding special events. And when you look at Locke Street, James Street, even the gore and the pedestrianization of that, and on Ottawa Street, and ultimately working towards Kenilworth being part of that renaissance, what we find is that we have the so hungries of the world, or those types of events, or the super crawls, or the art crawls, and what have you, on Locke Street. They have their annual festival as well. And what we find is that because of the abundance of people attending, that the capacity of seating and providing shelter, particularly for those that are most vulnerable in many cases, the seniors and people with disabilities, that we don't have anything that can meet the need at that present time. So once this was proposed to me, and in researching it and bringing it forward with respect to feasibility, I must commend staff for their very exhaustive and extensive research and recognition of the importance of this as a pilot project, and really the demand that will be seen in the future, particularly where we need it most. And those are really the concrete jungles of the city, the older parts of the city, where we're seeing the renaissance and the urbanization. And as Councillor Morrow made reference to, a lack of green space in those areas, and a deficiency that we're trying to address, but addressing outside of this particular initiative. So when the small business community brings this forward, obviously in a participatory way, I must acknowledge, not only acknowledge, but research and commend them, and particularly on this particular item, which I strongly endorse. And the cost of this is very minimal. We have two options. I think because it's a pilot that we should seek out the lower cost component, which would be SAGE, which would be the 40,000 rather than the 150,000, and measure the impact citywide and the demand for this particular mobile shelter and park, and study it accordingly, and then address it as on a need basis or needed basis throughout the city. We'll find, I'm sure, the demand, as they have in other cities, is going to be greater than the supply of this one unit, which is a good sign, because we know based on best practices, there will be a demand for it. The question becomes how much of a demand. Some cities move too quickly and increase their inventory too quickly, such as Montreal, where they have to scale back on a couple of them. So we've learned from some of the other communities, based on best practices, already what will be truly our target for these types of units. But at present, we're starting with one. And I think if we start with the most frugal option, it'll provide us with the necessary data to expand upon this particular concept, which I believe is not only innovative, unique, but very progressive, and really extends upon the renaissance the lower city of Hamilton is experiencing. And for that, I strongly support what's before us, and I move it accordingly, seconded by Councillor McCaddy.
Okay, so if you're moving that, I'll keep the chair. I have a speakers list of McCaddy, Jackson, Powers, and now Councillor Morrow. Councillor McCaddy.
I'll have to, I support this, I'll have to. take
Okay.
on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. If I could just,
Go ahead, please.
I was around and have been briefed and brought up to snuff on it, and it involves both wards 3 and 4, and I think it's a great project for the whole city. Thank you.
You, Councillor McCaddy.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to congratulate Councillor Marula for bringing this forward. It was his initiative that generated the staff report that's in front of us today. And I've been watching the use of shipping containers in various municipalities across the country, internationally, and they're being used for a significant variety of different purposes. They're fairly inexpensive. I guess that's what's driving the interest in the shipping containers. They're plentiful around the world. There are lots of them available in many places, and I think the use that's being envisioned here as a seating space and as a beautification opportunity with flowers and I think the kind of thing that's shown in Appendix D here, the container planter approach that's demonstrated in that visual is exactly the kind of thing we need throughout the city, and Ottawa Street's a great spot to try that out in the pilot approach. And Mr. Chair, Councillor Marula, we've got Patty in the audience today from the Ottawa Street BIA, who's done just an extraordinary job. I mean, they won what was it, the best street in Canada. It was about 2 years ago that was recognized. Ottawa Street, we're leading all streets right across the country, and it's a tremendous place to be. And the So Hungry festival that you supported, Councillor Collins supported at the very beginning, when it's important to support a festival because nobody knows quite how it's going to go. And Councillor Morelli as well, of course, a former Ward 3 councillor in that area. You share Ottawa Street between Ward 3 and Ward 4. That's when they needed support at the very beginning, and you all stepped up, and it's an extraordinary success. Now we're all jumping on board saying how great it is, but you were the guys who started it with Patty and others on Ottawa Street. So I think this is tremendously innovative for Hamilton, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the pilot works out. And I think there may be other locations across the city where this applies, Mr. Chair, and I think it is some of the sort of stark architecture down here, even across the street, with the Convention Center Hamilton Place wall just immediately out that window on Main Street. It's pretty austere, Stalinist architecture to some extent, and brightening it up with the kind of approach you're considering for Ottawa Street, I think it's probably something we need to look at. So tremendous, and I'm extremely pleased to second this motion, Mr. Chair.
Councillor McCaddy. Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm supportive. Just the A part that says in consultation with other BIAs, so I presume that means if this mobile urban park is not requested on Concession Street, if I approve this today, there's no obligation that someday it will be for sure on concession. It will be in full consultation with that BIA, correct? Thank you very much.
Powers.
Perhaps to the proponents, and perhaps Councillor Marula can answer the question. Just give me clarity with regards to the financial component of it. I believe there's anyway, I'll leave it you to answer that question, sir.
The capital component is, we have two options before us today. It's 40,000 or 150,000. What I'm endorsing is the 40,000 expenditure and for the pilot project itself. Oh, at this point, it hasn't been dedicated. They're going to be reporting back with finding a source of funding for it, which is indicated in the recommendation.
Okay. So, sorry, through supplement. So with the funding to come from the city, from some other source exclusive of the two logical streams.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, I have no further speakers on item 8.1. It's been moved by Councillor Marula and seconded by Councillor McCaddy. All those in favor? Carries. Any opposed? No. Thank you. Chair's back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. And moving on now, we have